Well, welcome back. Our city centres and central London in particular have felt the brunt of trading losses during the pandemic. In fact, it's been rare that our city centre London hotels have got above 20% of normal trading levels for the whole of this year, going first into the pandemic in January. Rent, landlord relationships, property taxation, what support local authorities are providing in reimagining and rebuilding our urban hubs, all going to be crucial as we come out of the pandemic and into the recovery period. Now, earlier, Peter caught up with top developer and property owner, the founder of Urban Splash, Tom Bloxham, one of our more enlightened landlords, John James, founder of Soho Estate, that owns property throughout London's West End, and Suzanne Rosnowski, CEO of New York-based Relevance International, an agency working on a number of regeneration projects in that city, to talk about these and many other issues. Here's his interview.
Well, it's great this afternoon to have Tom Bloxham of Urban Splash, John James of Soho Estates, and Susan Rosnowski of Relevance International over there in New York City to talk about really the reimagining about our city centres. As we all know, the pandemic has probably hit our cities, not just in UK, but globally, probably harder than any other part. It's really getting a sense from you guys about how you're going to help the rebuilding, the re-imaging of our city centres if they need it. Now, Tom, can we start with you? Because although you're based up there in the northwest of England, your company Urban Splash is involved in regeneration projects right around the country. How did the pandemic affect you? Are you still continuing with projects, or everything stopped?
You know, very much continuing the projects. We had a very small shutdown at the very beginning of it on all our sites in our factory, but we very quickly got those back working. So now everybody's back at work, nobody's on furlough, and many are working from the office, but we're working on sites and trying to push things really well. I mean, it's certainly not good news, and we're probably, working at 95% of capacity and 105% of cost. But the big thing is we're still working, and we're lucky that many people and still building more homes and workspaces across the country.
Now, have you seen an effect on city centres more than perhaps some of your other areas? And are your clients starting to rethink, or are they pushing ahead with their original plans?
I mean, we've definitely seen a difference. And I suppose in many ways, Urban Splash, the products, ours are bigger than most people's. We have green space in all of our developments, and usually we have a hierarchy of small private spaces, medium-sized communal spaces, and very big public spaces. So naturally, our product has been the thing that people always look for, but we look for in a way more in the pandemic. I think we've seen sectors vary very differently. Residential has been very resilient and actually very active, and people have been more focused on their homes, more focused investing on their homes. Offices have been sort of about average, and clearly leisure and entertainment, many of your listeners, has been the hardest hit. And that's been, as landlords, that's where we've been hardest hit on collecting the rent and on keeping places busy. I suppose what was interesting was in Plymouth, we have the Royal William Yard. And we saw a huge boost actually in August after the first lockdown, before the second one. And I think staycation played a part of this. And actually we saw income increase year on year, and website visits go up by 50% on the previous year, and car parking income go up by 50%. So I think on a small bubble there, we saw a recovery coming, and things go very positive, which hopefully is a good fortune teller of what might be to come when we finally get over this.
So you're seeing some demand. It depends on where you are. John, obviously you're there in central London, the West End. Perhaps give us an idea of what's the extent of Soho Estates. It's not just Soho, is it? Or how far
well, there's largely Soho. We're kind of like a concentration of property in an area, which is all in W1. We own quite a bit of Leicester Square, which is absolutely desperately desolated right now. But Soho itself, we join in with a group of what we described as stakeholder landlords. And one of the good things that came out of this, and from the very beginning, is the thing we are all going to have to get an understanding of, which is the cooperation between all parties, right? And what we were invited to do way back in March was with a unique access to the leaders of the Westminster City Council. So we're on a Zoom call, the stakeholder landlords, which are the Grosvenors and the Westminsters, the De Walden, Portman. They're largely the aristocracy of landowners that have always been there. And then there's a few new ones, and we're one of them. But basically what you are there for is because you do have a concentration of property, you have a wide base of tenants, and therefore, you've got you have a more responsible attitude to the community in which you are, because you've more of an interest and more of a stake in it. And so what happened in the very beginning is that the Westminster City Council invited, there's 12 of us on this call, but in this case, you are on a Zoom call with all of the Westminster cabinet. You've got the leader, Rachel, and you've got the chief executive, Stuart, but they're all on the camera, and this is the best access you're ever going to get.
Yeah,
We've
right.
never had such access prior, right? But we're in such an extraordinary time. But this was very productive. So you could start to ask questions, and we started with the promotion of the alfresco dining, and how to get this to happen in Soho, which is an awful lot of bureaucracy goes on just to close roads, to stop traffic, to prevent car parking spaces, for God's sake. Seem to be somewhat important in certain types, I do not know. But the Soho alfresco was basically the ability to get straight into government, and government then to realize that this is so extraordinary. The Soho was economically on its knees, and therefore we all worked together to try to solve the problem. And their problem was solved by direct control from cabinet level to officers who had to throw away the rule book a bit and make this thing happen. And that happened very well. And throughout summer, it was and we continued to be very successful. And because we had a lovely summer, and the weather was helpful to all parties, and people were doing quite well. Although, to be truthful, the streets in which we managed to pull this off in our concentration is only really 5 streets, but
Yeah.
we kind of started with, I first of all talked to all of my tenants, there'd be 22 of them. I encouraged them to talk to their neighbours, and that became 40, that became 80, and eventually there was 112.
And so that cooperation and working together is work. I want to come back to that, because I think there's an interesting question about how people can work together, whether that is best done using government or elsewhere. Can I for the moment, John, can I just bring in Suzanne there? Because looking over at New York City has probably been, even by London standards, has hit just as bad, if not worse, than certainly in terms of hospitality. You've been working on various projects over there. How is New York trying to get back to life?
Well, if you ask New Yorkers, it's the best kept secret that New York is still the place to be. Just nobody knows about it. They're still living, thriving in New York. There are actually social media pages dedicated to, oh, look how desolate and scary this place is. And they post positive, lively street, shots where everybody's still enjoying the city. It really is, it's a new era in New York City, because the people who love and want to fight for New York City are still very much alive and thriving, even though they're struggling as a business. Culturally, it is about to have a new renaissance. I think that we're looking at a new time that's actually very exciting and positive. There's going to be a lot of reinvention happening in the city, because necessity is the mother of invention and reinvention. And it's caused us all to say, maybe we don't want to bank on every street corner in New York City. Maybe we want to do something better, more exciting. And it's still very much a vibrant cultural hub. So while especially hospitality has been hit so hard, retail as well, they're all excited to reimagine together. I love what John said about we have to come together to make the new future of our cities work. And it's actually an opportunity. As hard as it's been on everybody, As much as we've had to sort of brace ourselves to get through this storm, we're really, I think, coming out the other side, we're starting to see a lot of planning, a lot of possibilities, a lot of hope. Here in New York and in America, with our election finally getting behind us, it's easing up and we can breathe. It's like, okay, we're going to get through this. If we just can come together, may the best ideas win. One of the things that I want to say for sure that I've found through this whole process is we have to let go of some of the bureaucracy, some of the red tape, whether it's governmental, whether it's, just with who controls the different sections of the city. I've been working a lot with people at the various bid level, business improvement district throughout New York City, and talking about how we reinvent retail experiences and how we up the ante and how we really think about commercial real estate and the whole kind of cycle of life in New York. And it's really been a place for cultivating new ways of thinking of the city, which is exciting. However, I can say that I have presented to certain people who will not be named, who it takes a moment of pause to say, let's hear out the best ideas and let's let this be a renaissance for the truly creative and innovative. Let's not make the C-suite have to have the idea, because it's probably not going to come from there. It's probably not going to come from necessarily the places it used to come from, because we're talking about a bubbling up of new and fresh ways of doing things, thinking of things. And that's why these sort of talks are really great, because we have to collaborate to get through it.
Yeah, let's open up. I suppose the basic question for all of you is, do our city centres need reimagining, or are we going to go back to where they were before? Tom, you're nodding. What's your view on that? You've been involved in, as it were, regeneration of places like Manchester. Is that a blueprint, or do we have to look at something different again?
Well, a crisis in Chinese, I think, is threat and opportunity, the two characters put together. And I think this crisis, like many others, is a threat and an opportunity, and it's how we react to it. And our city centres have been changing for many years. And if you take my home city, Manchester, I suppose the big change for there 30 years ago was when the Trafford Centre opened. And Manchester was primarily a shopping centre. The Trafford Centre, which is the biggest shopping centre in England, opened nearby, and it reacted. And many other cities didn't react, and many other towns around by, the shopping's been decimated. Manchester did react, and it said, actually, we cannot compete head on with the big floor plate shops and the free parking. As retailers can't compete head on today with the internet. But what we can do is make it Manchester an experiential centre. And so all the focus was about bringing people back to live in the city centre, improving the street environment, working more closely together with the retailers and the restaurateurs and the city council, and making the city a great place to come and experience. And what we've seen, I think, with this crisis is that's been escalated, and the impossible has been able to happen. And as John and Suzanne said, streets that you could never close down have been closed, people eating in there. Streets have been taken over by cyclists and pedestrians rather than cars. All sorts of potentially wonderful things are happening in our city centres. Now, admittedly, the economy is very difficult. Many people in business are being hurt very well. But again, they're responding in incredibly imaginative ways. And so, I think we will come out of this crisis stronger. And I think, the best retailers, the best hospitality people will survive. Sadly, many people won't survive, and it will take its toll. But I think we will come out of it stronger. And I think cities will reassert themselves as great places to visit, great places to live, great places to hang out, and more than just a set of shops.
Let's know you briefly, Tom, before I bring John back in. Who's going to take the lead? Because John's talking about that collaboration with Westminster City Council, and obviously Manchester had a lot of that cooperation already going. Who takes the lead on this? Who is the best people to do it? Is it local government, or is it the private sector? Or do we get bogged down?
I think clearly the local council, the elected politicians have got a leadership role to play in that. I think what is really important with them, though, is they are listening and they are talking to lots of other people. So, for instance, in Manchester, we've got an appointed so-called nighttime czar who's somebody who's worked in hospitality all his life, who's got the ear, the mayor, who's actually working very closely with the local authority. So, I think it's both everybody, and I think it's about everybody sitting down saying these are our cities. They're not their cities. They're not your cities. They're not the retailer cities. They're our cities. They belong to the people who work there, who live there, who inhabit there, as well as the politicians. And it's about working together and envisaging, what do we want our cities to look like? Where do we want to go? How do we want to bring our kids up? What do we want to do in the city centre? And using this crisis to make them even better places. And I think we're going to see a rebirth of hospitality. I think we're going to see a rebirth of retail. It won't be the big multiples. It'll be more independence. It'll be more small traders, be more handmade, more artisan, more craft. We see it already with more barbers and more restaurants and more nail places and more tattoo parlors, but places that makes it interesting and exciting and makes Manchester different for Sheffield or different to New York or different to other city. So I'm always a positive. You can't do my job.
Obviously, yeah. A lot of enthusiasm there. John, from your point of view, I mean, are you seeing the need to reinvent and reinvent the city centre, or your part of, say, the West End, or how much is going to go back to where it was? How much is going to be different? What's your sense of?
Well, I've always said Soho as a destination. Soho has always reinvented itself throughout the years, throughout generations. The history of Soho is very colourful and it's very inclusive. It was an area of tolerance and an area of bohemian drunks in the street quoting Nietzsche, and it's got a history of such. And it is never reinvented by the likes of me or other landlord types. It is reinvented because people turn up and they bring these ideas, and they've been able to do that quite successfully for a very long time. So we've had lots of innovatory, small, independent restaurants and bars, and skateboard shops, and such as this, which is relatively. A switch to the younger generation of customers, and you look around, you think the sad thing is, I would have said earlier, prior to this, that the independent retailer and the majority of the innovative and the keen and young and fresh ideas were our absolute success. Whereas now I'm fearful to say it is our weakness, because these are the businesses that they need support to survive. They've survived through summer, survived. They are not saved. That's the problem. They are not saved. We have to carry on saving these businesses. We had a winter program ready to go, where they relaxed the rules on gazebos, they relaxed the rules on heaters, they relaxed the rules on occupying the street, although we've all got to then accept you've got to sit in the street with a woolly jumper on, okay? But in truth, they want to, people need the joys of life. The interaction of human beings is a very important factor of our health and well-being. So you could see it happening. And we are trying to work through into saying we need to keep this situation alive and trade through all of next year as well, to give the businesses the chance. It's a very common thing said to me by some people who said, John, I don't have the personal resources to fund a long drawn out recovery. Now, in many cases, ours particularly, the first thing tenants look to is the landlord. And we have done a great deal of assistance. But I've got to tell you, I am not an infinite resource. And we are running a business like anybody else. And I can't, landlords will, the cracks will begin to show in landlords' lives in about 3 to 6 months, because that's the sort of the time scale it takes for no rent and the consequences thereof.
I mean, John, you've helped people more than a lot of other landlords. I'm going to bring Suzanne in a minute, but I want perhaps there's a practicality. I mean, I've got a question in actually from Rob Pitcher, who's chief executive of Revolution Bars, as you know, and I know Tom knows him pretty well. One of the questions, obviously, from an operator's point of view, is in terms of, do we need that restructuring of the property market, the rental market? Do you think that upwardly only rents need to go? Do you believe that we need to look at more turnover-based rents? Is that a long-term option? we're looking at possibly landlords investing in terms of equity in operators. John, is that something you see happening?
I think, look, it's such a diverse mix of people and or businesses and also requirements, obviously, right? So no one boot's going to fit everybody here. But I've resisted the turnover rent because of the amount of work necessary to keep to monitor that sort of situation with very, very small businesses. We have lots and lots of small restaurants in Soho. Yeah. And it might be easy to tap into some of the bigger chains, but we don't have any. It was always our program not to have any, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That was our philosophy. No chains in Soho was one of the things that Mr. Raymond Sir started when he was alive, But I'm resisting turnover rents. I'm listening to it, Brian. I'm not saying no altogether. I might be forced to have to acknowledge that that's a way forward. But my view was, I didn't really want to be and felt I had the right to be and interfere with how people run their businesses. And if you then go forward in the future and say, we are going to look to turnover rents, then you're going to go to a situation where the criteria for who you give your property to is going to have to be stricter. They're going to have more financial backing. You will lose the young man who comes into my office, spins me a story, and I just think, I like you, I'm going to give you a chance.
Yeah.
That has happened.
Yeah, well, you did it famously with Soho House, didn't you?
Soho House, that Nick Jones was exactly that young man.
And obviously Suzanne knows about those guys in New York now. Suzanne, let me bring you in. I mean, one of the obviously the features of cities like London, Manchester, and New York is commuters as well. That's the other thing. Because obviously we talked about people living back in city centres, but how are you seeing that? Do you think people will come back to work? Because there is this sense that what's happening in New York and London are very much the same. People just aren't coming back to work. They're staying home.
I know. I have to be honest and say that my staff is also still working remotely. And I think that the challenge right now is everyone needs an impetus or a trigger to say, okay, now's the time when everyone's going back. And it has this feeling of, okay, you first. We have to all come together and really feel like we need to show up for our cities. We have to all agree we're going to show up together at the same time. I don't know how we're going to mobilize and unify everybody around some sort of a phase plan or something, but we need some leadership to really, number one, first address safety, because I can speak for myself. And, one of the challenges is thinking about public transportation back into the cities and putting all of our staff at risk. We need to come up with some plan around safety first. Second, we need to have leadership really roll out, what is the plan and the resources. And obviously each city's different. But one thing that I do know we need is to kind of have a plan. I mean, no one's going to just start coming back. We really do need leadership to usher it in, and we need resources. A lot of the entrepreneurs are feeling like if we're going to open up, we're going to come back, we're going to bring the staff back, everyone that was on furlough, we're going to bring back. Then we need to know that there's going to be other people in the city to come back to and actually partake in the business, and that volume will be there. So I really think we need some sort of a campaign. I mean, we're a public relations agency, marketing agency, and a brand strategy agency. So Relevance's role in this is really, yes, reimagining, but also coming up with how are we going to rally everyone and make everyone feel that they have a role to play in showing up for their city. And I think we have a lot of work to do there, because no one really seems to know, when that's happening, how that's happening. So we need to do more talking, quite frankly, about how we're going to encourage everyone to have a participation and have a role in bringing it back, because it's not going to just be any one or two people, who are going to affect the change. Everyone has to feel more like a grassroots campaign. Yeah. Personal responsibility that I love my city enough that I'm going to show up for my city.
I think that's one of the things which unites all of you, is that sense of collaboration, and the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, you've got a collaboration, but you still need consumers coming back. Let's pull this together. And, you know, we've covered quite a lot of ground, and we're obviously a bit limited on time, but get a sense of your vision for cities. Tom, I mean, you're obviously optimistic about the future, but what do you think is going to be different? What is going to be the same? Or is this a sort of entrepreneurial churn and innovation going to be the thing that keeps our cities alive?
So cities are living, growing organisms that are changing all the time, as John said, and they don't stop. And this crisis has actually accelerated the change. I mean, in Manchester, we're in full lockdown here, but I was out of the weekend walking and the town was incredibly busy, and there were a huge amount of entrepreneurs, and there was a butcher shop selling really fine meat, and he had just taken a barbecue outside and started cooking it for people. Ways were open. And so people fundamentally love cities. People love the social interaction. It's been stopped because of the crisis, quite rightly, but people are very, very keen to get back involved there. Landlords are talking to their tenants much more than they ever have in my lifetime. People are taking things they took for granted and now appreciating it. So I think when we get over this crisis, you know, the thing about this crisis, unlike previous crises and recessions, we know it will finish. We know there will be a vaccine, there will be a cure, we will get over it. And then I can see a real boom time for cities and for the experience in there. And I see many more independent retailers. I see trouble for retail landlords, but I see a boom for retailers. And I think the city centres, like many European cities, will open up for many more independents, much more experiential, many more people who enjoy working there. We'll have more emphasis on bikes and pedestrians and parks and public spaces. So I see it long term as being positive.
And presumably more people living in city centres as well, which is one of yours.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, and that's been a continuing trend since the Second World War with the collapse of big industries. So people are moving back into city centres, more and more people moving in the city centre, but also more commercial in the suburbs, you know, in the 5-minute city, the 5-minute walk. And we're going to see more shops opening, you know, less huge supermarkets, more experiential, more independent retailers working out in the suburbs, in the small villages, as well as people living back in the city centre.
Yeah. Okay, just probably in a couple of words now, because we've used our time up, and I think well, John, in terms of Soho, you know, what can we expect from Soho? Saying perhaps in a year's time, you're obviously optimistic. Is there anything you think is going to make Soho really the place to come back to?
No, I think it's already shown that in the fact that what was been allowed so far has been the footfall in Soho has been phenomenal in the area which we managed to put this the car-free zone, and that we went outside and it wasn't. People do want to go out. They want to interact. I think we all, going back to work is a really important factor. But of course, on top of that, the city offers the life of a city is a life of culture, the arts, the theatres, the cinemas, the things that, right now are closed. And that's a very sad thing. Once these the attractions of a city are allowed to reopen, and that will generate, and we have no tourists at the moment. And Leicester Square has a footfall of 52 million people per annum who are not in Leicester Square right now, but they will come back. Yeah. We all know this is going to be a blip. The blip we have to do is to survive this blip, help as many people. I don't want to plant any new flower beds. I want to water the flower beds I've got. Yeah. I want to keep them growing. I want them. I don't want to be pulling out weeds. I want to keep these people alive, and I'm going to do that as much as I possibly can.
And one last question. It's a yes or no. Do you think Westminster Council are going to be supportive enough?
Yes, I think that Westminster Council have seen a great opportunity, for all of which is the connection between one of the things that's come out of the Soho thing. Of all the different businessmen and business ladies, they are prior to this, they were too busy being independent businessmen and ladies and not much talking to each other. There's now they've started a thing called the Soho Business Association, which has now got 80 businesses. And these people have been next door to each other for the last 20 years. Yeah. They're talking to each other now. They've got a voice. The legacy of this is a voice of 80 business people whom have seen the light and are going to come forward, and they're going to have a voice. They're going to have a good lobbying voice to Westminster. That is a big success.
That's great news. And the final quick word from Suzanne, are people talking to each other in New York?
Yes, absolutely. They're talking to each other. And I think that one of the good things that's going to come out of all of this is we're going to just enhance our originality. Everyone is rethinking how they do business, why they do business, what makes them different and unique. And so we're going to come out of this with even more cultural innovation and more experiential, as Tom said. Also more edutainment. I think that's in the future, which is educational entertainment. Ways to take retail and make it experiential, ways to take all the different hospitality and services and cultural institutions, and they're going to become a little bit more of a mishmash where you don't just get one thing at the retailer. You might get 2 or 3 or 4 because you know what? We've all got to pivot. So
it's creativity and flexibility as well, so it can't be necessarily all centrally controlled. Gentlemen, Suzanne, thanks for your time. I think we'll try and get you back in a year's time to see how all this pans out. But the great thing is that enthusiasm you've got, and actually your faith you've got in the innovation of retail and hospitality. So for now, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time. We'll see you again very soon. Thanks.
Thank you.